right, guys. Welcome to Metagame Monday. Awesome to see you guys here. I'm always looking forward to this time of the week. We have a few things to cover before getting into the actual action. This previous weekend, I had a lot of fun doing commentary at the European Unity League. They had a qualifier weekend with a double header, Modern on Saturday and Legacy on Sunday. Super cool stuff. When the dust settled, we had Andrea Mengucci versus Mocked in the finals of Legacy. The unfair blue-black Reanimator deck versus the fair Demir tempo / mid-range deck, which is pretty cool. I always had have a lot of fun working with Will, and I really like the initiative of the European Unity League. So if you're interested in potentially qualifying for a 20k euro European Championship around 10 months from now, you should go to unityleague.gg and tell your local game store to incorporate their point system, because you can, even by playing FNMs, by playing store championship, stuff like that, you can earn points. And if you're at the top of the leaderboard, you get an invite to this tournament with pretty hefty cash prizes on top. So yeah, I just wanted to put a good word in. I'm not affiliated with those aside from working their event on the weekend. I just really like their initiative. So if you're in Europe, go check it out. Another small fun fact here, Andrea Mengucci is a good friend of mine. He messaged me on Wednesday and basically said, I have a Legacy tournament on the weekend, but I haven't won a match in Legacy in 2 days, so what should I play? So I gave him my 75 of Reanimator. I sent him my guide, and he ended up doing quite well for himself, barely losing the finals to a very, very powerful magician, so there's certainly no shame in that. So yeah, my guides are good enough for Andrea Mengucci. Maybe they're good enough for you. If you're interested, go to my MetaFi page, and don't forget the discount code. It's also over there that I'll be organizing the Eco Cup 2.0. I already have 3 VIPs lined up. There's a little bit of a Eternal Weekend Champion. There's a legend of the game. There's a crusher from Southern Europe already ready and waiting, and they will be battling off against 29 of my members. And I think the price purse this time will be 60 treasure chests. So if that's something for you, go check it out. And if not, not a problem at all. Now we can get into the metagame talk. All right. So looking at this, we have the metagame. You know the drill, 40 decks. I did hide something over here, but I'm not going to tell you quite yet. Let's start with the Showcase Challenge, because today I've chosen to go top 32 of the Showcase Challenge plus the top 8 of the Unity League Legacy Tournament. So that's still 40 decks. Of course, that means that I left out 4 or 5 Legacy Challenges, but you know, that's how it goes. I'll start with the biggest sensation, which is this card, Scythecat Cub. So this is basically a better bristly bill, and the deck that took down the Legacy Showcase Challenge was good old Cradle Control with 4 copies of Scythecat. So how was that possible? You remember last week, I talked a lot about don't lose the days, don't get Blood Mooned, and the most important thing, don't lose out of the graveyard. How do we not lose out of the graveyard? We incorporate incidental graveyard hate that are serviceable cards or are good in multiple facets, right? We talked a little bit about the artifacts off of Saga or with Nethergoyf, where the card type matters. We talked about endurance. We talked about a lot of things here, and this was a quad endurance deck. Ended up taking the whole thing down in the hands of Newton. Newton, of course, an elf specialist, has played in the deck for years and worked on it. So this is just the perfect combination of playing to your strengths, taking advantage of you being a deck expert, and then tweaking with the metagame in mind. So hats off to Newton. You're an example for everybody, and yeah, it was just awesome to see. Also, in that top 8, 0 copies of Reanimator. 0 copies of Reanimator in the most competitive Legacy tournament of the year. That is surprising for sure. But, of course, we do have Reanimator in the grand scheme of things when it comes to the top 32, when it comes to the paper top 8. So it's not that Reanimator is irrelevant or anything. It's just, it didn't get over the hump this time. 7 copies of Reanimator. So that continues to be very, very strong. You should keep respecting it, and certainly don't go down on hate. If anything, you should go up on graveyard hate. I'm not going to talk too much more about that, because that's a very known entity at this point. I will mention 0 copies of Upsal Spells did anything in these tournaments between the Showcase top 32 and the top 8 of the Unity Legacy. That's something to note. Now we have a column with 7 copies of Tameo. So these decks are very different. Some are going to be, you know, Dimir midrange. Some are going to be a bit more Dimir tempo. Some are going to be Esper. Some are going to be straight blue-white. Straight blue-white. I don't even know what you want to call it. 4 Tameos, 4 Murktide, and then a bunch of good removal spells. And the usual suspects out of blue, mate top 8. So Tameo is certainly a card that has many, many flavors to it right now. The card is amazing against any blue deck. The card is good against any combo deck if you manage to survive, because then it's a card that can kind of, you know, run away with the game card advantage wise when you get a bit more time. But first thing is to stop your opponent from winning, of course. It's not very good against the Ancient Tomb decks, mainly because of, you know, you can get under pressure, there's Chalice in the mix and all of that stuff, but it really shines in any, let's call it Ponder matchup. Next up here, we have kind of what is a returning theme here of Mono Red Prison and Painter. So basically red Ancient Tomb decks, cards that make Hydroblast worth the sideboard slots in Legacy. And it's just pretty cool to see that this, you know, very, very balanced. Like, let's imagine we had 8 copies of Mono Red Prison here. Probably wouldn't be the most fun to play, according to most people. And the same with Painter, so it kind of remains this expert deck that is very good when the format is very blue. So pretty awesome to see, and I like those numbers. Still like both decks. The Blood Moon deck is a bit more plug and play, where the Painter deck requires a ton of practice. So now the weekly Nadu check, after I got checked a couple of weeks ago in the comment section. 2 copies of Cephalid Breakfast, that means 8 copies of Nadu, so role player at the very least. Cephalid Breakfast is a deck that has the ability to win turn 2, but also has the ability to play a bit more of a mid-range game with Saga, with Nadu, and stuff like that. You know, the classic plows and forces. So that speaks to a lot of players. In that sense, it reminds me a lot about Reanimator. And at that point, you have to ask yourself, do I like Entomb or Animate better than Illusionist plus Nomad? And we probably do, right? The Plane B pivot, you can argue it's better out of the Urza Saga deck, but at least that's something you have to consider. A couple of copies of Sneak and Show. That's just always going to be an interesting deck, and especially with the printing of Stock Up, you want to look at blue decks that's already playing blue mana sources and Ancient Tomb, and Sneak Attack certainly qualifies, so I'm pretty excited about that one. 2 copies of Eldrazi. It's almost getting a bit boring at this point, but I can't really take it seriously. Like complaining about Myco Spawn being an abysmal card and stuff like that. Let's just make sure you don't lose straight up to Eldrazi and you have game, and you'll be fine. This is a niche deck, much like Nadu, so we can probably move on from that discussion very, very soon, unless something drastically changes. So now it's time for the big reveal. So I already talked about the winning deck of the showcase being a giga surprise. Now we talked about all the decks that put up multiple finishes. And now it's time to look at the big pile of decks that put up single performances. Single copy of Dreadnought. Love to see that. It's a niche deck. I love it. But I do accept that it's a niche deck, especially with the format moving away from Lightning Bolt. More pushes, more plows, more endings means Dreadnought is having kind of a tough time. So at that point, you can't really rely on it. 1 copy of Lands. Always love to see that deck. 1 copy of Death and Taxes, the Yoran variety, which is a very, very good grindy deck. I've talked about this multiple times in the past. It's a good card, good deck against, you know, Blood Moon, good deck against Delver type decks and the Tameo decks. So yeah, only 1 finish here. It's a bit disappointing, but yeah, I still like that deck. Only 1 copy of Delver. This is huge because I really like Delver, but I also realized that if we're playing against a ton of Orcish Bowmasters decks, then it might not be the best. So Delver's taking a little bit of a backseat this week. 1 copy of Naya or Celestia Adepts, just cool to see, right? Almost anybody had written off these decks, you know, the Cradle Control, the Reliquary decks because of Nadu, but it's still, you know, it's still in there on a niche percentage, of course. Then we have Cloudpost, another expert deck where a small handful of people are very dedicated to this and they will put up results from time to time. The Cradle deck we already discussed. 1 copy of Grixis Tempo. So this deck had neither Delver nor Tameo, and it was kind of a bit of a brew, a little bit of a Mockingbird going on with Nethergoyf and Channeler. Just cool to see. I really like Molten Collapse for its flexibility against especially. You can kill Chalice of the Void and Murktide Regent with the same card. 1 copy of Fast Reanimator. So between Oops and Fast Reanimator, only 1 copy. And all the other weeks, it's been like 4 copies, 5 copies, 6 copies, right? Then we had a sweet Wheels deck, mono blue, Ancient Tomb deck once again. We had Narset, Hullbreacher, and then Days Undoing to make life hard for your opponent. Single copy of Mill, which is hilarious. So big shout out to the Mill player. Then a couple of initiative varieties. We had a Boros version in the paper tournament in Switzerland. It's been a long time since I've seen that deck. I remember I played a lot of Grief, and whenever I played against this deck, I would always, Grief their Dungeoneer, reanimated, and it was just not a fun time for those guys. So pretty cool to see that deck back. And then there's also a green-red version where if you like the green, I think it's because you like Minsk and Boo. Maybe you like some sideboard options. Also, I will mention that the green and the red initiative card, they don't share creature type, but the white and the red do. So there's a little bit of Cavern of Souls being better in the Boros version. Minor details, but could be important. And then a single copy of Doomsday. I've always talked about this. If you've watched the series, you'll know that's an expert deck. I have high respect for people doing well with Doomsday and Painter. Those are like my 2 premier examples of, in my hands, they would not be tier 1 decks, but in those guys' hands, it is a tier 1 deck. So that's the full metagame breakdown. So let's see if we can kind of group these decks a little bit more. So you can put the Delver deck and the Grixis deck here. That's kind of the Days decks, right? You can go Ancient Tomb deck there. Maybe you can even put Dreadnought here because it's a Days deck. Then we have kind of big mana situation. I guess that's somewhat similar to Eldrazi at times. Then we have Creature deck, Stompy deck, Graveyard deck, combo, I guess, kind of like Sneak, and then Mill. I don't know where to put it. So we can make these broader categories, and that's oftentimes how I do it when I build my sideboard. So I don't just go, how much Dimir Reanimator is there? I'm going to look across the format for how many decks. Let's say I main deck Nile Spellbomb in my Dimir deck. How much mileage am I getting out of it? And then I'm looking here. Oh, okay, most of these are Murktide decks. This is another Nethergrowth Chandler deck. Okay, cool. Painter, they play the Welders and the Engineers, so it's also good there. Okay, Disrupting the Graveyard against Knight of the Reliquary decks and Lands decks can also be good. It's also good against Breakfast. And then all of a sudden, you end up with a huge chunk of the metagame where you can realize that your Graveyard hate is actually quite awesome across the board. So same with a card like Consign. Sure, it's good against Eldrazi, but it's also good against Painter. It's also good against Moon because we have the Chalices and we have a lot of triggers. We have the One Ring. It's even good against these initiative decks. So that's just a good way to evaluate. Force Negation is another good example of, Force Negation. Yeah, you can exile the Loam out of lands. It's not only to counter Sneak Attack and to counter Doomsday, to counter Blood Moon. It also counters Chalice and the One Ring out of this deck. And then all of a sudden, it's just adding up. It's a good way to evaluate instead of just looking for this specific card that crushes one deck. You need to see how good is it across the board. So Hydroblast, another good example. Then you want to be looking at how many Delver variants and mid-range variants are red, and how much Painters in the meta is Sneak Attack there at 1% or 5%, and yeah, it's just a fun little puzzle to justify your card choices at the end of the day, because the goal of a sideboard is to have as much mileage throughout a tournament. So it's sometimes up to the single player if they want to have like a hit or miss card in the sideboard, or they want, upgrades they can use more frequently. We talked about this on the channel before. Sometimes the importance can outweigh the frequency and stuff like that. So all in all, very, very exciting week for Legacy. And I think when somebody can win the most competitive tournament, I cannot stress this enough, the absolute most competitive tournament with 4 copies of Scythecat Cub, then most things are possible. And I think it's time to put, the ban talks and all of that to rest and just focus on getting to work and being creative and taking down your next tournament. And that's going to be my final message for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know if there's anything that sticks out to you when it comes to this. Sure, Reanimator numbers are high. what would you get rid of out of that deck if you were to tamper with the format? Do you like any unbans? Is Legacy fine and we should just enjoy the ride? I know what I think. So yeah, let me know what you guys think, and I hope to see you back soon here for more competitive Magic. Bye, guys.